I'm Liam Revell, a PhD student in the School of Fashion and Textiles, and today we're going to talk about needlepoint. Now, needlepoint is a counted thread embroidery, and unlike traditional forms of embroidery where the stitches are accessory to a base cloth, with needlepoint you're using a canvas, so a mesh, and the stitches make up the fabric more or less. So needlepoint can either be gros point or petit point. Now, so gros point describes an embroidery that uses a canvas mesh with about 7 to 16 holes per inch, whereas petit point uses a mesh that has 16 or more holes per inch. So the canvas is measured in points, and that is how many points per inch. So the higher the number, the more holes essentially there are per inch. So for example, something like a petit point would use a silk mesh, which is very similar to an organza, that has about 40 holes per inch. But you can use other fabrics. This is an even weave canvas. It's 12 points. So that means there are 12 holes per inch. This is a tapestry needle. What makes it different to a regular hand sewing needle is that it has a rounded end and a large eye. The rounded end ensures that you don't split the fibers as you enter into the fabric, which is very important when you're using, a more conventional type of fabric. And the large eye means that you can thread, various thicknesses of yarn through. And the yarn you choose will depend on the canvas that you're using, how many points there are. But traditionally, needlepoint is done with a wool yarn, a wool tapestry yarn. So this is an example here. It's a single ply. You can buy one called Persian wool, which is stranded, which means you can take off as many, yarns as you like or as you need. Now this is a cotton, 100% cotton. So that's, used for, when you're getting to the petit point side of things, because it's quite fine. And then you have stranded cotton as well. So like the wool, it comes in strands, so you can pull it apart. So, you can use one, you can use two. I think it comes in up to, I think there's like maybe 6 of them there. So that's that. What we have here is examples of the 3 stitch types. They all appear, very similar. The top stitch is a half cross stitch. The middle is a continental stitch. The bottom is a basket weave stitch. The 4th type of stitch we'll have a look at is a binding stitch, which is used to finish off a piece. Here we have the same 3 tent stitches, but on what is obviously a finer mesh. On the top, we have the half cross stitch. We'll ignore that second one down here, but this one is the continental stitch. And on the bottom, we have the basket weave stitch. Now, with this side, what I've done is I've gone away from the normal up one and over one that you'll find is the normal tent stitch, and I've gone up 3 and over 1. So what it's done is elongated the stitch. Now I think it creates quite a painterly effect. So, you could play around with dyeing the cloth or painting onto the cloth and using the stitches to fill in areas of those, where you've painted or where you've dyed, which, not only would create, colour or play with colour, but you could also play with texture as well. Looking at the back of the stitches, we can definitely see a difference. So with the half cross stitch, there's not a lot of coverage, and that's good. With the continental stitch, it's quite dense, you'll notice. And then at the bottom, the reason the basket weave stitch takes its name is because the back of the cloth has a basket-like appearance. So this is an example of needlepoint that I've done using plastics and a cotton knitting yarn or a crochet yarn. What I want to show you here is the border stitch or the edging stitch. So not only have I used it to finish the piece, I've used it to join two together to create a double-sided needlepoint. Now, I'll turn it back here and you'll notice that, and actually this is a really good example of where using the continental stitch has slightly warped it. It hasn't been blocked yet. But as far as the edging stitch goes, you'll notice on this side, it's quite a straight stitch. It's slanted, but it's like a satin stitch. On the reverse side, you'll see that it looks like a plait. I find, as I said, the plait much more attractive. We're going to now do the binding stitch. So working from the left, even though it's the right when it's at the back, but when it's on the right side, it'll be the top left-hand corner. So we're just going to anchor our thread in the back. We're going to pull that through. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flip it over to show you. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring it out at the top of our needlework, of our needle point, one stitch over from the edge. Pull that through. Now I'm going to turn it around and I'm going to flip that back over. Now what you'll notice too is that I'm leaving one row at the top. Now I'm going to take that directly back through the hole that I came through, making sure that I don't go through my needlework, but through the top of it, through the top row, and then I'm going to pull that like that. Then I'm going to go through the next one, and because I can't move my hands much, I may have gone into the needle point, but I'm not going to worry so much at the moment. I'm just wanting to show you how this is done. Now what I'm going to do is count over 3 from the one that the stitch I've just made. So 1, 2, 3. I'm going to go in, and pull it tight. Then I'm going to go back and I'm going to go into that next stitch, that next empty stitch, and pull it tight, and then I'm going to count 3. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to do this all the way along. Now because I've got some gaps in my work, it won't turn out as as well as it would if I had needlepoint all the way along, but it's more or less just to show you the technique. Now I've taped the edge of this canvas because the edges are quite sharp, and this way you avoid catching the yarn on the edge and shredding it, which is really annoying. With the half cross stitch and the continental stitch, what we do to secure the starting thread is we enter into a hole from the top, a distance away from where we're going to start the work, and we leave a little tail. Then what we do is we come up here, we enter the hole from the bottom and bring the thread out. Now what we do is we go up one and across one, and we enter the hole. And we do that for the next stitch. And we go down. This diagram shows the half cross stitch. So what we have that represented by the dotted lines is the mesh, and the blue, the stitch. Now, in needlepoint, there's quite what I find quite an unsavory sort of terminology, but a clean hole and a dirty hole. Now, a clean hole is a hole in the mesh that has no thread in it, whereas a dirty hole has thread in it. So in this diagram, what we can see is that the thread enters the clean hole from behind or from underneath, and then it enters into another clean hole from the top. Then we come down and we re-enter a clean hole below the mesh above. So we enter a clean hole from underneath or from behind, and we go over to 4, then down to 5, over to 6, down to 7, over to 8. Now when we come to the next row, what we do is we work back the other way on the second row. Now, once again, we're coming up through a clean hole at point 9 here, and we're entering into a clean hole again at point 10, and then we're coming up, but this time what we're doing is we're entering a dirty hole from behind or underneath, and then we're carrying it down to point 12, and this will continue all the way to the end of the row. And then when you start on the third row, you just repeat the same steps as in the top row. Now, I've tried to sort of capture that here, and it's like a sawtooth roof on a factory, on an old factory. So, you know, the solid line is the thread, the dotted line is where it goes under. So that's the half cross. Okay, so that's our first row. Now what we're going to do is do a second row. Now this time, so where we've entered to finish our last stitch, we're going to come up through the clean hole. We're going to enter the clean hole from the bottom. And then we're going to go one down and one over. So the top row, so each row, the stitches slant in exactly the same direction. Now this second stitch, what we need to do is we're going to bring the thread up through the hole above and through the dirty hole, so the one that already has the thread in it. And then we're going to go one over. And you'll notice this in the image. So always, if you forget which hole you're on, always look at the empty hole, go up one and across one to the dirty hole. And I'll just show you a little trick. If you want to increase the length of the row, instead of starting the next row directly underneath the stitch above, just move one over to the left. Okay, and now to finish it off, turn the work over and then just weave the needle as much as you can through the back. You might do that a few times up and down. It can be quite hard with this one, but that's that stitch. Half cross stitch. So the next stitch we're going to do is the continental. So we're going to start off in exactly the same way with our thread as we did for the half cross stitch. Now this time, what we're going to do is we're going to come up through a hole and then instead of going from the top to from the bottom to the top, we're going from the top to the bottom. And then we're going back up for the next stitch through the top and then down through the bottom. Up, down. Except what you'll find this time, so for example, here we're entering from point 1 here and then going into point 2, whereas with the half cross stitch, we entered at point 2 was our point 1 and we went over to our point 2. So what we're doing is coming out at point 1, entering point 2, coming up to point 3, down to point 4, up to point 5, and so on. Now when we come to the next row, what we're doing is we're going from 8 to 9, then up to 10, down to 11, and down up to 12. So that's an example there of the pattern you're making. Now for the third row, we're going to repeat the stitch in the same direction as we did for the top row. So remember, instead of coming through that first hole there, we're moving over to the second one. That way we keep a straight edge. So it's from the top to the bottom this time. And you would continue on like that. So the next row, which is the fifth row, would mimic the same direction as the first row. But I'm not going to go any further. But as you can see, the back, and to finish off, weave the thread through the back. And that's the continental stitch. So now we're going to do the basket weave stitch. This time you can knot your thread, and what we're going to do, it's called a waist knot. So what we're going to do is enter on exactly the same row that we're going to start on. So I'm going to go one down, and we're going to pull that through, and we're going to get that to there. And what you're going to do is you will cut that off when you actually arrive at it. So now remember, this is diagonal. So what we're going to do, so we want, that to be the edge there. So we're going to come down one diagonally away from there. And then we're going to enter diagonally away. So that's 1, 2. If you refer to the drawing, 3, 4, and then we're going to come up because we want to do the top edge. So that's our top edge. So 5, and 6. And it's probably not so obvious on this row yet, but it's diagonal. Then 7, 8. So we're starting to build up our top edge. And then just follow that diagonal line down to the next hole. 9, 10. So we're entering through the same hole as the number 1 stitch. 11, 12. So once again, look, we can see the diagonal. Okay, so this is the basket weave stitch. Now, you'll notice it's a bit different to the half cross stitch and the continental stitch in that it doesn't work from left to right and right to left. It works diagonally. So these dotted lines here are showing the direction that you're moving across the canvas. So the first row, you come out at 1 and then you enter into stitch 2, which is what we've been doing the whole time. Except instead of working like that, what we're doing is we're now bringing 2 up at 3. Sorry, 2 up through 3. And then in through 4. So this is making the edge. And then what we do is we take it from 4 over to 5 and down through 6. So we're making this top edge. Now with the next one, up through 7, down through 8, up through 9, down through 10, and then up through 11 and down through 12. And what you'll notice is that it's going diagonally across the cloth. And this is something that will become apparent when I show you how to make the stitch. What I'm going to do is okay, and then I'm going to start coming down to get my left hand side. And then we have a square. So I'll turn it over. You'll see the basket weave at the back. And then once again, just thread your yarn through a couple of times. And voila. Now, when I said that you always need to use an even weave fabric, I'm slightly not telling the truth. In this case, I've used a net. So net can be treated as if it is an even weave fabric. You could also use tulle, which has a very similar structure to it.